After defeat at Moscow in December 1941, Hitler decreed a new strategy, codenamed Case Blue, for the Wehrmacht. They were to strike deep into the Caucasus to seize the oil resources of the Soviet Union located at Maykop, Grozny, and maybe at Baku on the Caspian Sea. One of Lenin's favorite sayings was, "War is the continuation of politics by other means," and the invasion of the Caucasus shows this perfectly. Between the conclusion of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939 and the attack on the Soviet Union in June 1941, Stalin delivered substantial quantities of oil to Germany. This was the fuel for the Nazi war machine. From the U-boats in the Atlantic to Rommel's Africa Corps. But, from the day of the invasion, that supply was ended. And the failure to take Moscow and establish a vassal state meant that the Nazi oil stocks were low and getting lower. In June 1942, Hitler is recorded as saying that, "Without the oil of Maykop and Grozny, I must end this war." The Battle of Stalingrad was itself secondary to Case Blue. It was necessary to secure the eastern flank of the German advance. Preventing the Russians from cutting off the German troops in the Kuban, Chechnya, Ossetia, and Azerbaijan. Where the oil fields were located. So, Hitler broke a key rule of warfare. He divided his forces. Army Group South was separated into two groups. Army Group A was to take the oil fields and Army Group B was to advance to the river Volga and Stalingrad, then hold off the Red Army. There was also the Slovak Mobile Infantry Division, two well-equipped divisions of mountain troops and, after a delay, two divisions of Romanian mountain troops. Army Group A consisted of 3 panzer divisions, a total of about 500 tanks. Also, each had 900 motorized troops and half-tracks and 1,200 motorcycle troops, in addition to their armor. it was still a remarkably small force to conquer an area larger than Germany itself. Opposing them, the Soviet troops were a mixture of battered remnants of the defeats in Crimea and Ukraine, training formations, and low-quality border guards. They had hardly any tanks, and once the Germans cut the rail line from Stalingrad, they could not be resupplied. Instead, they had to rely on American and British tanks supplied by Lend-Lease through Persia, which were far inferior. The Russians were also handicapped in that a lot of the senior generals were appointed for their ties to Stalin rather than any military ability. The situation only improved in August when the High Command sent 4 brigades of elite airborne troops to the theater. Soviet sailors redeployed from the Black Sea Fleet and Azov Flotilla also proved their worth in key battles on the Black Sea coast. In addition, there were many NKVD troops in the region who have been suppressing nationalist movements in the rest of Caucasian republics. The German plan to launch another great summer offensive crystallized in the early months of 1942. Hitler's decision was influenced by his economists, who mistakenly told him that Germany could not continue the war unless it obtained petroleum supplies from the Caucasus. Hitler was the more responsive to such arguments because they coincided with his belief that another German offensive would so drain the Soviet Union's manpower that the USSR would be unable to continue the war. His thinking was shared by his generals, who had been awed by the prodigality with which the Soviets squandered their troops in the fighting of 1941 and the spring of 1942. By this time at least 4 million Soviet troops had been killed, wounded, or captured, while German casualties totaled only 1,150,000. In the early summer of 1942, the German southern line ran from Orel southward east of Kursk, through Belgorod, and east of Kharkov down to the loop of the Soviet salient opposite Izium, beyond which it veered southeastward to Taganrog, on the northern coast of the Sea of Azov. Before the Germans were ready for their principal offensive, the Red Army in May started a drive against Kharkov. But this premature effort actually served the Germans' purposes, since it not only preempted the Soviet reserves, but also provoked an immediate counterstroke against its southern flank. where the Germans broke into the salient and reached the Donets River near Izium. The Germans captured 240,000 Soviet prisoners in the encirclement that followed. In May also the Germans drove the Soviet defenders of the Kerch Peninsula out of Crimea. And on June 3rd the Germans began an assault against Sevastopol, which, however, held out for a month. The Germans' crossing of the Donets near Izium on June 10, 1942, was the prelude to their summer offensive, which was launched at last on June 28. Field Marshal Maximilian von Weichsel's Army Group B, from the Kursk-Belgorod sector of the front, struck toward the Middle Don River opposite Voronezh. Whence General Friedrich Paulus' Sixth Army was to wheel southeastward against Stalingrad, and List's Army Group A, from the front south of Kharkov, with Kleist's 1st Panzer Army, struck toward the lower Don to take Rostov and to thrust thence northeastward against Stalingrad as well as southward into the vast oil fields of Caucasia. Army Group B swept rapidly across a 100-mile stretch of plain to the Don and captured Voronezh on July 6. The 1st Panzer Army drove 250 miles from its starting line and captured Rostov on July 23. Once his forces had reached Rostov, Hitler decided to split his troops so that they could both invade the rest of the Caucasus and take the important industrial city of Stalingrad on the Volga River, 220 miles northeast of Rostov. This decision was to have fatal consequences for the Germans, since they lacked the resources to successfully take and hold both of these objectives. Maykop, the great oil center 200 miles south of Rostov, fell to Kleist's right-hand column on August 9. And Pyatigorsk, 150 miles east of Maykop, fell to his center on the same day, while the projected thrust against Stalingrad, in the opposite direction from Rostov, was being developed. Shortage of fuel, however, slowed the pace of Kleist's subsequent southeastward progress through the Caucasian mountains. And, after forcing a passage over the Terek River near Mozdok early in September, he was halted definitively just south of that river. One prong of the Wehrmacht headed into the Cossack heartland of the Kuban from mid-August. Badiani ordered a stand to be made at Krasnodar, the region's capital, but half of his troops did not even have rifles, and civilians tasked with digging anti-tank ditches had to find their own shovels. Realizing they were about to be assaulted by 3 full divisions of the German army, they wisely beat a retreat, and the city fell. The Soviets made a much better defense of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea coast, using redeployed sailors from the Black Sea Fleet as their main forces. Just as at Stalingrad, the Luftwaffe bombed the city flat, but the resulting ruins and rubble made it a death trap for the German infantry. After weeks of brutal street fighting in the shattered factories and apartments, by September 9th the Nazis did control the center of the city, but could not get past the bombed-out factories on the edge of town. And they made no more progress down the Black Sea coast. A second prom was directed to the oil fields at Maykop. These were the closest oil resources to Rostov. An elite unit of German commandos attempted to seize the oil fields using disguise and deception. Masquerading as Russian NKVD troops, they drove right through the Russian lines, joining the headlong retreat. Once at Maykop, they first destroyed all communications in the city before issuing false orders to evacuate. They were partially successful, and the town fell on the August 8th, but the oil storage tanks were ablaze. Worse, most of the Maykop oil fields were in fact another 45 kilometers away, and when they got to them, they found them sabotaged so effectively that whole new wells would have to be drilled if any oil at all was to flow. Goebbels thought it would a great propaganda coup to seize Mount Elbrus. The highest mountain in Europe. and the German mountain troops, with armored support, were sent into the high Caucasus. Through forced marches and bold attacks, they did indeed seize several of the mountain passes, which lay undefended, and hoisted the Nazi flag over Mount Elbrus. But the narrow mountain roads were terrible for logistics, but perfect for ambushes, and rendered the German panzers ineffective. It took 4 days to take food and ammunition on mule trains up to the mountain troops, and 4 days to evacuate a casualty. It was a pointless victory, and Hitler was furious when he found out. Another Pranav army group fanned out into the Kalmyk steppe. An arid region bordering the Caspian Sea. The region had hardly any water and few settlements to support the infantry. All the Germans could do was to fortify isolated strongpoints in the steppe, sending out long-range patrols to try and reach the Caspian coast and to disrupt Soviet transport of oil on the coastal railway, which they did achieve on a few occasions. Later it emerged that 150,000 tons of oil from Baku had moved north to supply the Russian war effort while the Germans were camped out barely 50 miles away. To reach the Grozny oil field, the Germans had to drive far to the south, to Chechnya, 500 miles from Rostov and the River Don. Budyani made no stand at the key city of Stavropol on the road to Grozny, which fell in 75 minutes on August 5. And just 6 tanks captured the next town of Novinominsk. On August 26, the Germans reached the river Terek at several points. And it was clear that a crossing would face significant resistance. The Terek made a natural defensive line for the Russians. The German tanks were now permanently short of spare parts and fuel. And their supply lines faced constant attack from bypassed Soviet units. But still, they crossed the river on the night of September 2 near Mozdok, North Ossetia, but were unable to expand their bridgehead. It was at this point that Hitler realized that Case Blue was not going to plan and relieved Field Marshal List of his command. He accused him of not following orders. This was at least partly true. He had sent his tanks up narrow mountains roads, allowed a futile diversion to plant a flag, and sent his infantry into the wilderness of the Kalmyk steppe, but that only reflected the chaotic decision-making in Berlin, the multiple objectives set. And the insufficient resources allocated. Amazingly, Hitler now decreed he would run things from Berlin over 2,000 miles away. The Nazis made one more desperate attempt to secure the objective of the whole campaign, Grozny and its oil. The elite SS Viking division was transferred. And on October 26, a panzer assault was launched towards Ordzhonikidze, which if successful might open the road to Grozny. They were successful at first, taking 7,000 prisoners in the town of Nalchik, but when they turned east towards Ordzhonikidze, they ended up entangled in minefields and surrounded on 3 sides. On November 6th, a Soviet counterattack surrounded the 13th Panzer Division, and although they fought their way out, it was at the cost of leaving behind most of their equipment, including 80 tanks and 1,000 trucks. It was a disaster, and the Nazi strategy was at a dead end. They could do no more. The Germans had captured a huge amount of territory, but had not secured a single one of their strategic objectives. They had not secured the oil fields. Maykop was unusable and Grozny unreachable. They had not encircled the main elements of the Red Army, who stood ready to counterattack. And they had not cut the railway from Baku to Astrakhan. The hope for uprisings of the Muslim peoples of the Caucasus did not materialize despite the best German efforts.